Hi fellow Hytalers, and welcome to my rebranded channel Hytale. And in spirit of the rebranded name, let's start this off by discussing something technical on Hytale, the chosen programming language. In any other game, nobody would care which programming language the game is programmed in. But Hytale has a kinda weird position here, because with it being kind of a spiritual successor of Minecraft, everyone is hoping to see a game that is better programmed than Minecraft was. Under developers, it's almost become a meme, where Minecraft is the example of how to not program a game. Because, let's face it, it's really slow. You see that especially when you compare it to the Windows 10 edition, which is programmed in a proper programming language, not Java, but C. In this game, I can easily ramp up the render distance to 48 chunks, with almost no impact on performance. Hell, the Xbox One X can run it at 48 chunks. And then even with the super duper graphics pack, which by the way should release somewhere, I don't know. But point what I'm making is that a lot of people have requested that Hytale would be programmed in C++, which essentially is the go-to language when programming any game. I mean, I'm more a fan of pure C, but C++ has a very comparable performance to C. In fact, it's almost identical. Now, still, when they revealed the programming language, they showed us that they used Java and C#. And don't be confused by the C in C#. It has nothing to do with C. In fact, in my opinion, it has more in common with Java. So it's in a class of slower programming languages. But now you might ask, why are there slower programming languages? And why would you even use them? To an outsider who has never programmed in any language or maybe has just used a little bit of Python or something like that, it's kind of weird because when you look at the languages, they almost all look very similar. And in this example, C#, Java and C++ or C have an extremely similar syntax. If you remember earlier, I said that Java and C# are in a similar group. So how do I group them? There are two main parts that make up how fast a language is. The first thing is whether the language is compiled ahead of time, compiled just in time, or interpreted. And then the second one is whether the language is garbage collected, or whether the memory management is manual. So let's look at the first part. A language like C, which is extremely fast, is compiled ahead of time. Because even C, which is regarded as maybe the fastest language out there, still cannot read directly by the processor. It first has to be translated in a very complicated process by a program called the compiler. Building these things is a science in its own and requires a lot of effort. It basically takes in what you see on the screen and then translates it to binary code which can be read by the computer. Now, to make this more visual, there's one language which is translated directly. So every line you write translates to one binary sequence. The reason why this is not the case for the bigger programming languages like C is that this language is really hard to write. Just show you an example of that and you will know what I mean. I mean, it's doable, people have done it and people do it still. And the output is impressive. You get programs which are extremely small and extremely fast. But most of the time it's not worth it. So in a real-world application you usually take a language like C. And again, the translation process from C to the assembly language really is not a direct translation. So this is also why compiling a program can take up a lot of resources and can take a lot of time. So what is compiled ahead of time, just in time and interpreted? A language like C is compiled ahead of time, which means that when you're finished writing the program, which then translates everything to a language which is readable by the computer, and this is the file which you then deliver to all the people who will use your program. And this seems perfect. So why is there any reason to do this any different? Because everything after that is slower. Ahead of time has one flaw, or kind of. When you compile a program for Windows, for example, it does not run under Android, it does not run under macOS, it does not run under Linux. So you have to compile for each platform and provide these files. So we say that the binaries are not cross-platform. Now, in most cases, this does not play a big role. But when it does, there are languages like Java. These languages are compiled just in time. In essence, that means that you're giving the people who want to execute your program your whole source code, so the exact things you write, and then they compile the program each time before they start the program. And when the program gets bigger, this might not be possible to do this in time. So this means that the compiler is running while you are executing the program and is constantly compiling parts of the program to native language, and you get where I'm going. And now you might also understand why Java is so slow. But wait, we haven't reached the top end of slowness, because just-in-time compiled programs usually use a in-between language, which is easier to compile, and they also compile segments, or even the whole program itself. There are, however, languages where this is not the case. For example, scripting languages, like Python, Ruby, or JavaScript. With these languages, there's literally another programming running in the background, which is reading the source file and for each line interprets what this means and then executes it. There are advantages, also outside of not having to compile the program. But in my opinion, they're not worth it, because a program written in JavaScript running on Node.js can be up to 10 times slower than a program written in C. And with JavaScript, we have the best case example. Python can be 100 times slower. So at this point, I think it's clear that for writing a game or a high-performance program, a scripting language is not an option. So why did they use C# instead of C++? And by the way, we know that Hytale is coming to Windows only. So no cross-platform excuses. Because when you look at it, C# is a little bit faster than a Java program, but not by a significant amount. And in most cases, C++ is still twice as fast as C#. And here we're coming to the second point, which is the biggest one in terms of usability. And that is the memory management. And this is a topic which most people find really hard to wrap their head around. Because a language like C has a very distinct difference between the heap and the stack. And it's extremely easy to mess up your memory. Don't get me wrong, it's doable. And you can do extremely cool stuff with it. But it generally means a lot of more work. And a language like C# is doing this automatically for you. Because when talking about memory management, there's one big problem in the room. Memory is slow. So for performance, you usually don't want to copy anything. What you do instead is you're copying references. These are variables which point to a direction or a chunk in the memory where the data is located. The slight issue here is, if you don't know what you're doing, you will mess up your memory. Because some variables are deleted automatically and some are deleted manually. It's not very difficult to manage this, because the system behaves very predictable. It just requires some attention. And when you're starting to reserve memory for things that size you're calculating at runtime, it can get really messy. So what a language like C# does instead is it implements a reference counter. That means that each time you reference a variable, so creating a variable which points to the direction of the thing you have in memory, it increments a counter which counts how many of these references are there. And then every now and then a garbage collector runs over the whole memory. And when there's a variable which reference counter is 0, that means that there are no references left. And this thing can be safely deleted. This of course takes up some performance, but it makes it a lot more easier to program stable programs. One of the most popular engines out there, namely Unity, even makes use of C#, because everyone that uses Unity writes in C#. However, the rest of the engine, so the main part, is written in C++. And this is where I think where the use of a low-level programming language really pays off. And mixing of languages can make sense. Reason why I bring this up here is that my hope is that Hytale makes use of mixing programming languages. We know that the server is written in Java, and cross-platform does play a role here, but for the main game, I'm still hoping that they use C++ in the engine, and just use C# as a kind of glue, a sticking thing that sticks everything together. Because again, where the use of a low-level programming language really pays off is small segments that are executed really often. Another reason why I think that they use C++ in the background is that they likely use DirectX. Just because DirectX is the most popular thing to use in games. And it's also the easiest to find programmers for. And as a matter of fact, there are no real DirectX bindings for C#. I mean, there are, but they're really old and they're deprecated since a long time. Now, with the server being in Java, I think it's okay. And especially for modding capability, I'm starting to appreciate it. Because obviously I want to start modding when Hytale comes out. And one of my favorite languages is based upon the JVM, so the Java runtime, and therefore is fully compatible with Java. It's called Kotlin, and it also compiles to JavaScript, which we believe is the scripting language of Hytale. So I hope that I can use Kotlin to build all my mod projects and have just one language for both scripting and modding. Also, what is really cool in Java is that there's a Java native API, or short JNI, which would enable users like me to write certain parts in C. Not sure how useful that would be, but we'll see. So let's wrap this all up. What do I think of the choice of programming languages? With Java for the server, I'm okay with that. The server needs to run on many platforms and on many processor architectures, and they also have developers which are experienced in writing high-performance Java. So writing the server in Java really makes a lot of sense. And it also is not uncommon to write servers in Java. Now, with the client in C#, I'm still unsure what to think of it. If they did write some parts in C++, I have no objections. It's a great idea, and you can have few people which do the high-performance stuff, and the rest can just focus on the game itself. So you have less people that can mess up things. Now, if they did write everything in C#, in my opinion that's almost as bad as writing everything in Java. C# is just not intended to be used for high-performance games. And to be honest, I would be really disappointed. I'd still play the game, but the increase of performance was one of my biggest hopes in Hytale. But again, I don't think that they did the whole thing in C#. Either way, I think Hytale will be a great game, and it gets better the more I see. Now, if you like these kinds of videos and want to get modding tutorials in the future when Hytale comes out, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. I'm doing these things in my free time, and seeing people enjoy it always gives me a huge motivational boost. So thank you all guys for watching, and until the next time, Hytech out.